in the early days of blogging, so let's say around 2003 or 4, there was this notion that this was the new thing, and bloggers were going to inherit the earth, as it were. And now the paradigm has totally sort of shifted. Like now, nobody thinks that big name bloggers are going to take over or replace mainstream media or any of that. The paradigm has completely shifted to social, and you have to fight with every content creator out there, or your uncle who's sort of making wisecracks on Facebook, or anybody who can tweet one smart tweet. You're competing essentially with all of those people. Okay, and this is the right presentation. Thank you. So I thought I'll talk today a little bit about this new paradigm. What can social do for your content? How do you sort of create and promote your content on social, and let social media, Facebook, Twitter, the other big social platforms, be a very powerful distribution engine for you. So there are fundamentally 3 trends that are shaping the landscape today, and I thought for every blogger it will be very useful to understand each of these 3 trends and then try and tailor your content accordingly. So the first one is the rise of social. You'll see that the power that, the kind of audiences that some of these platforms have integrated, Facebook is so huge, Twitter, this is the kind of audience at one place that you have, or at one platform that you have, that you've never sort of had in history. This is by far the biggest sort of audiences that have ever been aggregated. So what does this mean for anybody who's creating content, putting it out there for others to consume, and whatever be your motivations, whether you're doing it for fame or money or to have an impact and influence, all of us want bigger and bigger audiences, right? We all want to be reaching as many people as possible. So earlier, in the earlier era that we were talking about, everybody used to maintain your own blogs. There used to be very influential bloggers, and there used to be a blog role where everybody would link to each other's blogs and so on. And that is how you discovered new content. And now it's almost exclusively, like, I don't think anybody even bothers to put up a blog role anymore, because if your content is good, it basically travels on social, and that's how it reaches the audience it reaches. So the green button down there, the share button, that is really where the pivot is. I mean, that is the point where the success or failure of your content is sort of determined today. When somebody finishes consuming your content, or when they finish reading it, if they feel compelled to share it with their friends, family, their Facebook network, if that motivation happens, then you succeed. Because earlier we had a time when at blogging conferences or wherever people spoke about blogging, there used to be a lot of focus on SEO, like search engine optimization. People used to do all manner of like little techniques and skills to try and make their content more SEO friendly. And in many ways that is very counterproductive, because like the best content was not winning. It was the people who could deploy those tools better. Now thankfully that era is over. You can game, SEO is still important in some ways, but you can game it all you want. But if people are not sharing your content, if people are not sharing the pictures or video or what you've written on social, you're very unlikely to reach very, very far. The other trend to understand, and all these 3 trends will come together towards the end, but the other trend to understand is the shift to mobile. And mobile is both, we have now devices that are so powerful. You can do everything with it, and sometimes I think that we don't adequately appreciate, because now we've all, everybody's using these devices, and we take it for granted, like the kind of tech and the reach and the networks that we have access to. But if you step back a little bit and think, the mobile phones that we use today are it's said famously that it has more computing power than the supercomputers that put the Apollo 13 on the moon, or like the earlier moon mission. That's how much power we have, and all we do is to basically look at cat pictures using that power. But also like the cameras on these phones, or the power of, let's say, a photo filter like Instagram. Um, what Instagram does, or what, let's say, Snapseed does, is the kind of tool that you needed. I mean, just as little as 5 years ago, you probably needed a full-fledged photo editing software to do some of what Instagram does very, very easily. So the kind of power it puts in the hands of bloggers or anybody who's trying to create and promote content is really incredible. And in many ways, the mobile is also shifting how content is being consumed, because nobody is sort of typing a URL and going to a blog to figure out what this person has written and so on. Usually you're on Facebook or Twitter or some other popular app, and then the content is showing up on those feeds through the social recommendation engine. I was at a conference in New York a while back on digital. It's a very sort of cutting-edge conference about digital live design. So there was a gentleman there from Daily Mail who made a very interesting presentation, which is about the rise of vertical video. The video normally is, the human eye is sort of like in landscape mode, right? It's not in portrait mode. But because now so many people are shooting video with the phone, this very clumsy and unappealing sort of like vertical videos are taking over. And you will all recognize what I'm talking about, because our Facebook feeds are now full of these viral videos which are shot vertically. Now, it's not an optimal content format, because this is how the human eye sees and not this way. But these are some of the ways in which the devices that you use to create this content will also shape. Even in some ways it's optimal, in some ways it might not be optimal. But it's useful to think about, when you're creating content, a lot of people are consuming them on mobile. So you want to think about, okay, how is your headline going to look? How are the buttons, are the share buttons positioned optimally on your blog? Is it very easy to share? Is it hard? Is there a WhatsApp share button? I find that if there's a WhatsApp share button, people are sort of forwarding a lot of content on WhatsApp these days. As if the earlier forward jokes were not bad enough, now you have to get these links as well on WhatsApp. The other is the shift, the rise of video. Most of you would have seen this. This is the famous Alia Bhatt dub smash that sort of like took the internet by storm. And dub smash, now, dub smash is so much part of our lives. It's impossible to open Facebook without seeing a dub smash or a dub smash compilation that somebody has put together and so on, right? And if you think about it, this is not something that existed even as much as maybe a year ago. And now, it's hard to go to a party where somebody's not trying to create a dub smash right there. So it's bad, selfies are bad enough, and then now you also have to lip sync to a random video. So, what I'm trying to say is that the kind of new formats, the new opportunities that sort of come up, and before you know it, they're mainstream. And this is the kind of opportunity that bloggers typically should try and latch on to. Because if you're set in your ways, if you think of yourself as a blogger who puts up text and nothing else, or puts up text and video, text and a picture and writes headlines and nothing else, it's sort of, you're not always leveraging all the opportunities that are available to you at that point through the new platforms that are coming up, new apps that are getting really popular, and so on. So I wanted to use 3 examples to talk about, so, what does all of this mean? In today's paradigm, what can a blogger achieve? So on the one hand, I said blogging as an activity was sort of on a decline, but that's a certain kind of blogging, which is, having your own blog, writing content only there, and try and promoting it through, being on other people's blogs and so on. But on the other hand, the activity of blogging has gotten really mainstream. Anybody who's sharing things on social media, essentially that fundamental activity is blogging. It's just that nobody thinks of it as blogging anymore because it's become an everyday activity. You do it multiple times in a day, and it has become very mainstream. So people share stuff on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All of it is essentially blogging. But because it has become so mainstream, and all these specialized tools have sort of taken away different components of what used to be blogging overall. Now nobody thinks of this as blogging, but it has become an everyday activity that everybody does. So what is the kind of thing in today's paradigm that an individual blogger can achieve? I'll give you 3 examples. One is an example of what kind of influence, what kind of cultural influence and popularity a single person can enjoy by leveraging these networks. Another is an example of what kind of impact in the course of history and so on, in being a journalist with real impact on the mainstream discourse that one person can do. And the third is an example of, I'm sure like a lot of people, a lot of you here today are interested in figuring out, can this be a career, can you make money, and so on. So these are 3 examples. You will probably know Humans of New York. It's an American kid called Brendan Stanton. 15 million Facebook likes. It's nearly virtually impossible today to open Facebook and not come across either a Humans of New York post or a post by one of the numerous similar stuff that has been inspired by Humans of New York, including Goats of Bangladesh. It's a very popular Facebook group. What does he really do? I mean, he sort of, I'm a big fan of Humans of New York because he sort of showed everyone else in the world, like people were all trying to tell stories in different ways and build audience and so on. All he did was to step out with the camera and talk to the person next to you. You walk out on the street, it's stories of all of us, like, and in the kind of popularity that his content has got, and in the kind of stickiness it has, he's really showed us, a sort of fundamental truth about our lives, which is that we don't actually pay enough attention to the people who we pass by every day, or people who are sitting next to us, or because they are very fascinating stories. We don't have to go very far, or like, in journalism there is this notion that traveling in writing is a glamorous thing to do. Like, unless you travel very far off, it's somehow not sexy enough. And when our reporters tell me that, oh, there is a great story there, I want to travel there, but you won't let me travel, this, that. So I always tell them, why don't you step out and like look around? Like, there are stories all around us. So this notion that, you have to travel very far for a story, I think Brandon Stanton has very effectively showed us that, stories are all around us, and with a little bit of empathy and, some skills, you can both tell those stories very effectively and amass a massive audience. I mean, look at the audience he has amassed. Like, it's more than the whole of New York Times put together. It's more than almost any other mainstream media company put together. And it's just one guy. Like, there is nothing else he does. He goes out, clicks pictures, talks to those people. He just writes their stories, and it has become a sort of a media, unsurpassed kind of a media empire. And that really is the power that social gives us today, because Facebook has aggregated such a huge amount of people. And when somebody shares, like when your friend recommends a piece of content, you're much more likely to read it, engage with it, and share it further and so on. And this kind of power of distribution has, it has never existed before. It's a new thing, and I'm like, we will see more and more. And now there is so much interesting content that people are leveraging this kind of networks and trying to put up. There is so much arts content, humanities content that is very, very engaging, that's being shared in similar ways. This is a gentleman called, this is an example of the second thing I spoke about, like an impact on history and current events and so on. This is a blogger called Elliot Higgins. He blogs by the name Brown Moses. He was an out-of-job finance professional when the civil war broke out in Syria in 2011 and 12, and then it intensified subsequently. He sort of started becoming an expert on arms just by teaching himself sitting far away in England, nowhere close to Syria. And he just learned himself and became an expert on all the different kinds of bombs that were being used and all the different kinds of arms and ammunition that were being used. And when the Assad regime was telling people that we were not using this on our civilians, or we were not using this kind of equipment on our civilians, he wouldn't, he had proof to show that, am I running out of time? Like, Harish, how much time can I take? How much time can I take? 5 more minutes. Okay, great. So, yeah, he broke some of the biggest stories of that war, like way more than any other journalist did, like way more than war correspondents did, and so on. And this is a guy who has made $7 million from ad revenue from his YouTube channel last year. He makes he makes videos of him playing video games, and he lets people watch how that video game is playing out. He's not somebody we would think of as a blogger, but this is like one individual doing this. Incredibly popular, videos shared everywhere, and so much so that his revenue is very, very high. So what can this, I'll just reiterate some of these points. So your potential reach and influence is unparalleled if you leverage the social engine. The tools and technology that are available today is something that we couldn't even fathom till a few years ago. So it allows anybody who wants to create content to just focus on what you're really, really good at, and most of the other logistics are very easily taken care of by all the other tools that are available, and social media, of course, can be very powerful. So what is it that you can do? A few practical tips to become a better blogger. Work hard on your headlines. And to me, like very often I come across very good content that's written by a blogger, or that goes viral as a post, and it always strikes me, what is the real difference between this and what, let's say, a site like HuffPost or BuzzFeed or anybody puts up? And a lot of it is really to do with the difference in the headline. Bloggers don't pay adequate attention to the headline because they're caught up in writing the piece that they think is what people want to read. But if your headline is not good, nobody's going to discover it. And especially if you're relying on social for your content to travel, the headline better be really, really good. And in this context, I'll mention one of the tricks that most mainstream sites that do well on social, they use is this idea called the curiosity gap, which is, in the earlier zamana of newspaper headlines, what the headlines was supposed to do was to give you what is this article about. Now, you're not really telling people what this piece is about, because if you give it away in the very beginning, then like now the dharma of that headline is more to create enough curiosity for them to click, to make people click. So you have to come up with creative ways to create that curiosity gap so that people feel motivated to click. If the headline doesn't deliver, and if it's clickbaity, people are soon going to stop clicking on headlines when they see that this is from a certain destination. You should use proven formats like listicles, like 5 things, 7 things. BuzzFeed says that you should use an odd number, not an even number, and they probably know their game really well. So you should develop a consistent voice. Write authoritatively about what you know. That doesn't at all mean that unless you're an expert in what you write on, you shouldn't write at all. You can always write on a small piece, but what you're writing about, you should probably be really clear and really sure. This is one thing I've seen, leverage bigger media platforms to amplify your brand. This is something I've seen successful bloggers do really, really well. You're producing your content, you're putting it up on your own destination, but also put it up, like, write for mainstream outlets, blog for the Huffington Post, put it up on Medium, send it across everywhere. So you can use, and once journalists know that you're an expert in a certain kind of thing, then they will call you for comments, they will include you in their own lists and so on, and that will sort of amplify your brand a lot more. You should identify the medium that is best suited for your message. If you're principally a photographer, or if you're sharing pretty pictures, you should probably be using Instagram or Pinterest and so on. And you don't really need a text-based blog to, you basically want the influence and reach. And some mediums, depending on the content the kind of content that you're putting out, like some platforms are better suited, and you're probably better off focusing your energies on that. maintain good production values like, typos, grammar, error, punctuation, and so on. If there is slop, it really turns off people. And so you might be one person trying to, write a little bit about the things you enjoy and like and so on, but you have to maintain the same production values as a mainstream outlet, because fundamentally now you're all on the same page. You're competing for attention on somebody's Facebook feed, and nobody's going to say, oh, look, there's a typo in the headline, but this guy's a blogger, let's forgive him. Before you're thinking of writing a piece, you should think a little bit about, okay, how is it that I'm going to try and sell this on social? Because there might be one hook in that content that might travel well and sell well on social media. And it might be a good idea to think about it a little bit even before you start writing and producing a piece of content, because then you can use that hook to deliver well on social, and then it will hopefully travel well. I think that's it. Thank you very much.